Right, good morning everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. This particular topic has become sort of a huge issue around the world, and certainly we've seen very tragic cases in our country recently as well. And I think the big thing I want to do is I just want to start by looking at an overview of what it means to keep children safe in general. And then what we'll do is we'll become quite specific to sport, and specifically sport within the school context. So that'll be the departure point. If at any point in time people want to ask questions, please just raise your hands and I'll ask Anne or Janice to just sort of intervene and say, look, there is a question being posed, etc. What I will do at the end as well is I will give lots of time for people to ask me quite specific questions around the presentation, as well as any potential cases they've got. If not, I will present some cases I have and how those have been managed across time. Okay, so the first thing to understand about the workshop is it's the child protection world in our country and internationally is well regulated. The difficulty that we find is often that the systems are not entirely, they don't work in fantastic ways. There's lots of limitations around those systems. And the big issue is that there's a lot of sort of reluctance to engage the system due to misunderstandings or due to comments that people often make to me, like the system doesn't work anyway, or what's the point, or I don't want to get involved with the police. But what we need to understand is that this presentation is really about how we think about protecting our children within the context of our law. And then obviously with sport, there's an international context to consider. And then within the context of the school. So all of those things overlap with one another, and it's in the overlapping that often the gaps appear. So firstly, and obviously I would do this if I was in a face-to-face presentation far more kind of interactively, but I'll just ask you to reflect while I'm talking. So the first thing I ask people when I do these programs is, why did you choose to work with children? Now, there may be a few of you out there who didn't actually choose to work with children. It's something you ended up doing by default. And others of you who did choose, and those of you who chose to work with children may sort of be like me, bald and pulling your hair out and saying, why did I do this? But I think ultimately, the majority of us, we really wanted to make a difference in the lives of young people, and as a result, a difference to the future of our country. So we want to make a difference in the subjective experience of children at the time they're going through various phases of development. And within the teaching context, we know we've got lifelong development, so children need to they need lots of things, but from a Maslowian perspective, they have basic needs which need to be met, which often in our context aren't. And after that, the next level they need is to be safe. Now, if children do not feel safe, they cannot learn. So that's across the life, across the entire lifespan. But then across life stages, children have various needs. And we know that by when we teach them to read, by when we teach them certain mathematical sort of concepts, and introduce them to sort of various levels of volume of work and complexity of work. And the big thing in that is that we are here to ensure the optimal development of children. And the optimal development of children presupposes that they feel safe. Because as I said earlier, if they don't feel safe, they cannot learn optimally. So safety is a precondition to learning, and where children are not safe, it is a barrier to learning. From an education context, we need to mitigate against. So that's the context of it. And the Spider-Man lesson is one where with that level of power, knowing that we are almost sort of, kind of almost gods of children's childhoods in terms of their learning and what we can impart, we have to recognize that there is a very, very big level of responsibility that is bestowed on us. And I mean, I know from my childhood, I can think of educators that, I mean, to use a very strong word, because I have no other word to use, that I hated. that made subject intolerable for me. They were bullies. They made my life, at school in the south at Joburg intolerable. Whereas I equally had educators who are one of the biggest reasons I am where I am today. They were absolutely aspirational, they were inspirational, they were motivational. They changed the way I thought about the world and myself and about the people around me. I mean, extraordinary characters in the lives of, in my life and in the lives of those around me. And equally, we must recognize that those of us who are adults working with young people, that we work with young people that we really like. So there's some young people who make us feel good about ourselves, good about our coaching, like my SA champs. I've got 2 SA champs this year. They make me feel wonderful because, I've generated 2 South African champions. Equally, we have children that we struggle with the projections that they put on us. And there's some children I work with that I really struggle with. And for me, it's hard to work with them. And I have to always keep in mind that the primary aim is to be professional. And when we tend to revert to personal ways of being in the world, it is when we don't have the necessary professional sort of boundaries within which to operate. Okay, so the big thing is that we all have a negative duty towards the protection of children. And that's, as I've said, do no harm. And as I said, it's easier to work with certain children, harder to work with other children, easier to work in certain contexts, harder to work in others. But ultimately, we have to maintain the professional boundary, and we have to make sure that we are responding in the most professional way that is possible and checking ourselves all the time. However, this talk in particular is more than the first do no harm principle. It's talking to our positive duty. And our positive duty is the things we must do to keep children safe as the duty bearers to children's rights within the South African context. And ultimately, what we're trying to do is generate a world fit for children. And as I said at the beginning of my talk, is to ensure their optimal development.